Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Nur Shaleha binti Basirun. I am from KBA 2492B. Today, I would like to present about my individual assignment entitled The Impacts of COVID-19 on Migrant Workers. There are four contents in my presentation, which are Introduction, COVID-19 and Movement Control Order, Migrant Workers, and the negative impacts on migrant workers due to COVID-19. First, we look at the introduction. According to the World Health Organization (WHO), persons aged 60 and above are more likely to have significant and frequently fatal consequences after contracting the COVID-19 virus. Migrant workers in many receiving nations are younger than the native population. In Malaysia, there are only 6 sectors that can hire migrant workers, and those migrant workers must be the age among 18 and 45 years old. Those 6 sectors of the economy are manufacturing, construction, service, plantation, agriculture, and domestic work. The fast spread of COVID-19 among the migrant workers has been connected to their living and working circumstances, such as overcrowded dormitories and unclean environments. During the epidemic, this scenario worsened due to migrant employees are less likely to adopt physical separation and excellent personal cleanliness since they already had limited access to healthcare due to organizational and linguistic challenge. Furthermore, because migrant workers reside in different communities from the main population, they are frequently forgotten and ignored by national activities and policies during crises such as this COVID-19 epidemic. The epicenter of the COVID-19 epidemic is frequently found in regions dominated by migrants in nations that accept significant numbers of migrant workers. There are more than 2 million migrant laborers live in Malaysia. The second subtopic is COVID-19 and Movement Control Order in Malaysia. COVID-19 has been classified as a pandemic by the World Health Organization (WHO) on 11 March 2020. COVID-19 has spread to almost 200 nations and territories by the end of May 2020, with over 5.7 million individuals afflicted and nearly 400 fatalities. On 25 January 2020, Malaysia announced its first COVID-19 case. On 18 March 2020, Malaysia adopted early precautionary measures by enacting the Movement Control Order (MCO). COVID-19 is a public health problem, but it also has a serious economic repercussions for Malaysia. Since the first MCO, all economic activities have been ordered to cease operations except for those judged necessary. Businesses that were given permission to operate were required to follow a strict standard operating procedure. Malaysia have been heavily affected by the spreading of COVID-19 and the adoption of the MCO, as has been the case in other afflicted nations, crippling numerous economic sectors. For example, the construction industry contributes 7.9% less to Malaysia's gross domestic product (GDP) in the first quarter of 2020 than in the same quarter in 2019. Similarly, the agricultural sector fell 8.7% and the mining and quarrying industry down 2% in first quarter 2020 compared to the same quarter the previous year. Next is migrant workers in Malaysia. The number of migrant workers, including documented and undocumented, is believed to be between 3 and 5.5 million. Malaysia has around 2 million documented migrant workers as of June 2019. Construction, manufacturing, service, plantation, agriculture, and household work were among the industries in which these people work. Malaysia's economy has generally been hugely dependent on migrant labour. This graph shows the number of migrant workers in selected sectors and percentage change from 2010 and 2019. As you can see, there are almost 900,000 of foreign workers in service sector of economy. In manufacturing industry, there are more than 500,000 of migrant workers. This means that both manufacturing and service industries employ the most foreign workers, totaling over 1.5 million people. The industry that employs the fewest foreign workers is mining and quarrying, with just 5,100 people. This figure represents of migrant workers made up a substantial percentage of employees in many industries, particularly among low-skilled labor. As you can see, there are more than 30% of the workforce in agriculture were made up by migrant workers in 2019 and more than 20% of the workforce in construction and manufacturing. In Malaysia, foreigners made up over half of the low-skilled workforce. More than 1 in 10 migrant workers were employed in semi-skilled jobs, which make up most jobs. Overall, it is estimated that 22% of Malaysian firms employ foreign labor. Without appropriate support to retain migrant workers employed, Malaysia's economy would effectively be cut off from a major portion of the labor force. This may be a further setback for firms already dealing with the financial effects of the epidemic. All of this points to the industry's increasing reliance on migrant labor in recent years. As a result, safeguarding these industries also safeguards the migrant workers who make up a large percentage of their workforce. The last subtopic is about COVID-19 and the negative impact on migrant workers. There are 4 negative impacts that happens toward migrant workers. The first impact is the increase of COVID-19 cases among migrant workers. Second, loss of income and risk of unemployment. Third, lack of food supplies. And last is labor rights violation. I will explain more about this impact in the next slide. The first impact is the increase of COVID-19 cases among migrant workers. The number of new COVID-19 cases among non-citizens increased dramatically while the total number of COVID-19 cases dropped. The Ministry of Health started publishing the number of non-citizens affected with COVID-19 in 7 May 2020, a week after the initial immigration sweep. The majority of non-citizens affected with COVID-19 were foreign laborers, despite the fact that the Ministry of Health did not reveal the category of non-citizens in its daily report. The number of non-citizens affected with COVID-19 increased dramatically from 9 cases per day to 1,413 cases per day between 7 May and 12 June 2020. This accounts for around 72% of all COVID-19 cases reported over the same time. To put it another way, non-citizens accounted for more than 2 from every 3 new COVID-19 cases documented over this time. As example, we can see at the Topgolf Company. Topgolf Company is a significant employer of migrant labor, has been identified as one of the largest COVID-19 clusters in recent months. As of November 2025, more than 2,684 workers out of 5,795 workers have tested positive, including 1 death. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 epidemic, this firm has been investigated for suspected labor violations such as non-compliance with the Movement Control Order (MCO), social distancing norms, workplace safety and health, working hours, forced labor, and residential circumstances. The second impact is loss of income and risk of unemployment. Prior to the implementation of the Recovery Movement Control Order (RMCO) on 10 June 2020, companies were required to cut their employment by 50% or more in compliance with the Standard Operation Procedure (SOP) in place. Many employees, especially foreigners working as daily income earners and productivity-based laborers, which is those who pay based on production, were unable to work starting from the first MCO until the Conditional Movement Control Order (CMCO). Some were permitted to work a set amount of days each month, while others were not permitted to work at all. This scenario significantly decreased these employees' monthly income, with some going without pay for 3 months in a row, especially for those who were not allowed to work during the MCO. The limited hours of business operations considerably decreased the monthly revenue of migrant employees who were paid on an hourly basis and allowed to work. According to the Malaysian Human Rights Commission, many foreign laborers were denied permission to work by their employers while also receiving no contact from them once the MCO was implemented. The third impact is lack of food supplies. In terms of food access, migrant workers confront three possibilities. The first one is many migrant workers, particularly those who live outside of cities or in distant rural regions, have restricted access to meals due to lengthy hours of travel combined with shorter hours of business operations in grocery stores and restaurants. While some foreign laborers may be able to acquire food supplies close to their employment and lodgings, other reports suggest that they were forced to pay exorbitant prices by vendors and local businesses. Second, many migrant workers were hesitant to leave their hiding spots to acquire food supplies, especially those without valid travel and employment credentials. While civil society organizations and trade unions offered some humanitarian aid, which is basic food and other daily necessities, to illegal migrant workers, it was insufficient. Third is food aid may not be provided to migrant workers who live in regions under Enhanced Movement Control Orders (EMCO) due to a lack of resources. This is because food aid was only provided solely to local residents in these regions. The last impact is labor rights violation. During the pandemic, the number of cases of labor rights abuses and exploitation rose. Certain migrant employees were not paid their monthly wage even before the MCO. Some employers reportedly withholding the migrant workers' paychecks as early as February 2020 make the employees unable to fulfill basic requirements and pay for their accommodation. As a result, several workers were compelled to leave their rented homes or rooms in order to live in even more crowded confines with their fellow compatriots. Migrant workers also reported labor rights abuses such as arbitrary termination of employment, unpaid salaries, and inadequate housing circumstances to the MTCU, Malaysian Trade Union Congress. Some employees were repeatedly forced to labor in non-essential jobs during MCO, while others were left in the dark about their employment status owing to a lack of contact with their managers. In conclusion, the COVID-19 epidemic in Malaysia is clearly having a detrimental impact on migrant labour. The lack of cohesion and incoherence in the response of Malaysian government entities to deal with issues that impacting the migrant workers resulted in unfavourable actions and severe repercussions for migrant workers. The epidemic has worsened the lack of safeguards and exploitation of migrant workers by their employers. As a result, matters concerning migrant workers' rights, welfare, and safety must be addressed quickly. Migrant workers will play a critical part in the economic's reopening. Therefore, current labour laws and regulations ensuring their rights and well-being should be enhanced. While we recognize migrant workers' significant contribution to the economy, this acknowledgement should be reflected in how we treat them in both good and bad economic times. By this slide, I have come to end my presentation. Thank you for your time and have a great day.